This class is on DNA testing, titled Doing More with DNA, Helpful Tools and Strategies. And it's taught by Sarah Stoddard, who has presented 2 previous classes on DNA. Both those classes are in our archives and can be accessed by going to the website. It's a very interesting and fast-moving area of research, and very helpful too for us to locate those we're seeking to find in our history that may be elusive. We appreciate Sister Stoddard and her expertise and her preparation and her willingness to share her thoughts and her tricks with us. And we'll turn the time over to her now. Sister Stoddard.
All right, so brief intro in case this is the first time you're tuning in. I graduated from BYU in 2009 with a degree in family history. I've done private and contracted genealogy research since then, and I currently work for a company called Legacy Tree Genealogists. Some of my areas I like to research in, besides DNA, I really enjoy German research and general US research. And so this webinar is going to have, this presentation is going to have a lot of, going to cover a lot of different things, a lot of different topics, a lot of different features from the various testing websites. So it's sort of a buffet of different tools and tricks you can use, and hopefully you'll hear something in it that will be useful to you as you try to do more with your DNA results. So just a refresher, the 5 main testing companies that people generally test through for genealogy purposes are 23andMe, Living DNA, Family Tree DNA, AncestryDNA, and MyHeritage DNA. That's just some basic cost figures and descriptions of the kinds of tests they have. There are some smaller companies out there on the market as well, but these are the biggest ones, the ones you're most likely to find matches in, and they have more established reputation, have been around a lot of years, have well-established reputations and privacy policies and things like that. There are also some other companies out there that specialize in medical results and medical testing to check your DNA for genes you may have for certain medical conditions. That's not really what I'm going to talk about today. If you want to get one of those kinds of tests, I'd suggest talk to your doctor about what you might need for what you're interested in. But some of these companies I will talk about today do offer some medical information in addition to the ethnicity, DNA matching, that kind of stuff that we've already talked about. So I'm kind of going to run through each company and point out some things that they each have that are similar to one another, but then maybe a little bit different in how they display it or what kind of information they give you. Most companies that were on that list, those big 5, they will give you ethnicity results. They will give you lists of people that you match. They will give you some tools to sort your matches or to search through your matches. And some of these companies offer health features, health data. They offer the ability to share your results. I'm not going to get a lot into today of how you share results at each company because it's very specific to each company, but there are ways that you can share your results with others in your family that might be interested or somebody that's helping you with your research. And then they all have some kind of privacy policy. The DNA tests that are just for genealogy or, these kinds of tests, they're regulated a little differently than the tests you get from a doctor's office. And in some cases, there are just not as many regulations out there. So what you really need to do if you're concerned about privacy is read through the policies of the company. There is a link I have included at the end of my presentation that's an article from the New York Times that kind of goes over the differences between these companies and their privacy policies, and just make sure you're knowing what you're giving permission for. If they are gonna share your data with medical research companies or other third parties like that, read the fine print. If you're okay with that, go on. If you're not, then don't. So AncestryDNA, we've already talked, I think, a good amount about their ethnicity estimates on the last webinar, but they have even recently updated some things. One of the new things they're doing that's exciting is they're trying to be able to predict which parent you get each ethnicity from, or you may get some Scottish from parent 1, parent 2. And so that's a feature I'm looking at recently as I look at DNA test results. Like their ethnicity estimates in their communities, I think it's something they're still developing, and so it may not be 100% of what you think it should be, but in this example, these are my grandma's results, and she has a Portuguese parent and a parent from the US South, and this is very well reflected in her parent 1, parent 2 ethnicity breakdown. The communities over there on the right-hand side also very much reflect that. She does have Portuguese ancestors specifically from the Madeira Islands, and her father's side was from the Carolinas, and so that is pretty accurate compared to what Ancestry predicts for her. At Ancestry, one of the things Ancestry is really good at from their many years of expertise in records is they know how to build search engines and databases really well, and so they have a lot of searching features on your match lists that can be really helpful. Another thing that Ancestry and MyHeritage have as well is the ability to build trees, family trees on their websites, and attach those trees to your DNA results. And that can be really helpful for family history research if you're using DNA to try and track down an elusive parent or grandparent or great-grandparent or whoever you're trying to find. If your DNA matches have family trees, those are really helpful clues for you. You do need a subscription to Ancestry or to MyHeritage to view the full tree of a DNA match. A lot of times they'll give you kind of a preview, but if you want to see all the tree data, you do need to subscribe. That is one way they're trying to, get people that have DNA tested and are curious to go further and subscribe to their website. There are some limitations if you're on Ancestry as far as their ability to search your matches. If you are looking at a DNA match, say it's a second to third cousin, and you want to see all of the matches that are shared with that match, they will only take you down to shared matches that share 20 centimorgans or more of DNA with you. So some of those more distant matches will not show up in the list of matches you share with your second cousin, just because that would probably break the website's brain to go all the way down. There are some other external tools that you can take your raw data to find those more distant matches if that's something you're interested in, because you're looking at a historical DNA project perhaps where you're trying to figure out who was third great grandma's parents, and you need those really distant matches to help you with that. And I really like the features of being able to make notes on matches, being able to make the color-coded groups of matches. That makes sense to my brain for sorting and keeping track of what I've done. So that's a feature at Ancestry that I really love. They also have a feature called Thru Lines, which again, with all of the user trees that are on Ancestry, that's why they're able to do this. So if you are a DNA match to a bunch of people who have trees, and all of them are in their trees are saying, like in this example, Hugh James Granger is my ancestor, well, then they will create a Thru Lines group for you where you can see all those other people that are the descendants of this ancestor. And you do need to be careful with this, because if all of your DNA matches have the same error in their tree, they think Hugh's their ancestor and maybe he actually really isn't, then that will show up in Thru Lines. So it can, duplicate other people's mistakes, but it can be helpful. I've found this to be helpful in a couple of situations in research. So if I'm looking at these other matches that are descended from Hugh, and maybe my question is, who was Hugh's parents? I can look at matches I share with the other Hugh descendants that are more distant and see if any of those more distant matches have things in common in their trees that might point to who Hugh's parents or grandparents were. And then another thing that Thru Lines will do for you is, say you're stuck 2 or 3 generations down from Hugh, you only have back to your grandparents or something, but you're matching a bunch of people that are Hugh's descendants. It will suggest to you, you may descend in this way as well. And it will even try and use all the trees that are out there on Ancestry to kind of build a tree for you and show you how you might descend from that ancestor. Now, moving on to MyHeritage, they have a lot of similar features to AncestryDNA because both MyHeritage and Ancestry are sites that have records, and they have the ability to build trees, and they also have DNA testing. So their filters are a little bit different, but pretty, similar search capacities where you can search for a surname that's in a tree, or you can search for a user's name. One thing you can't do at MyHeritage that I wish they did was search by location that is in the person's family tree. So if you're trying to look for everybody that's in your matches that has ancestors born in Jones County, Mississippi, you can do that at Ancestry, but not at MyHeritage. Something I do like that MyHeritage has that AncestryDNA does not have is it shows you not only who you and your match, Molly in this case, for instance, share, but also how much those shared matches share with each of you. And so that's helpful in cases where if you don't know how you relate to a pair of matches, if you know that they're mother and daughter or first cousins or something, that can help you in your research to try and figure out how you fit into the family. Whereas at Ancestry, they don't give this information. So you don't know if you're looking at Molly's match, Beth, if she is Molly's first cousin, or if she shares just, 25 centimorgans of DNA and they don't even know how they're related. So that's something I really like at MyHeritage. They have this theory of family relativity feature, which is similar to the Thru Lines at Ancestry. So they will connect you if your tree and your match's tree lead back to the same ancestors. They will also propose multiple theories if they're not, if your tree and their tree don't match up, but they have an idea based on other people's trees that are in the database and so forth, how you might relate, they'll propose possibilities. And so that can be helpful too, just to visualize what is a third cousin versus a fourth cousin. Having a chart sometimes really is helpful for that. Like anything that's based on other people's trees, it's only as good as the other person's research. And so you need to verify this stuff. You shouldn't just assume it's right because Ancestry or MyHeritage has told you that's what it is. MyHeritage does have a health package you can buy. You can buy it with your regular DNA test or separately as an add-on later. It'll tell you your risk for different genetic conditions, and this is kind of an ongoing thing. They're adding reports for different types of traits and health conditions. They also purchased a couple of sites called SNPedia and Promethease. SNPedia is basically a wiki. It's like an encyclopedia that tells you different genes and what they're associated with and what's been learned about them by science. And then Promethease was a site that used to be independent where you could take your raw data from Ancestry or 23andMe or wherever and run it through Promethease and see what they come up with as far as genetic markers you might have for a certain health condition. So in the past, I took my AncestryDNA data and I ran it through Promethease, and it told me that I had a gene for melanoma, which actually wasn't a shock because I've had melanoma on the bottom of my foot, no less. And so it's like, oh yeah, that is a genetic thing. That's, not just because I spent time in the sun, I'm genetically predisposed to that. But anyways, those sites are both associated with MyHeritage now. And Promethease is still a separate tool that kind of has its own costs and types of results, but it's managed by MyHeritage. 23andMe, moving on to them and some of their features. They have some search features that are similar to some we've talked about. You can look for ancestors' birthplaces. If your parents have tested, they can sort by mom's side, dad's side. You can look for family surnames. Now, because 23andMe doesn't allow you to input trees, this information is going to be there if somebody's put it on their profile. You can sort your 23andMe matches either by strength of relationship or percent related, which is the same as centimorgan amount. They have ways of analyzing how big the segments are, for example, to kind of rank your matches by strength of relationship. Because it's possible for you to share more centimorgans with a match that is more distant than another match that you share less centimorgans with. It can be for different reasons, because of an endogamous population, or just because you may have less DNA but bigger segments shared with a closer relative. Anyways, that gets a little complex, but just know that you can sort your matches either way at 23andMe. So if you're looking for percent related versus strength of relationship, know that those are options. You can also sort by the number of segments shared, which kind of went over why that's important already. Sometimes if you share a lot of DNA with somebody, but it's spread out over a lot of tiny segments, that's not as significant. And by your newest matches, some of the other sites let you do that as well. This is kind of what your ethnicity results can look like at 23andMe. This is one way to view your ethnicity results. They also have kind of the traditional map view you can look at. But this actually will show you which chromosomes they found particular ethnicities on. This can be helpful in unknown parentage cases. If you can see that, I'm consistently having one of my 2 chromosomes having this ethnicity on it, that could be a clue that that parent was from that ethnic group. They, like at MyHeritage or at Ancestry, they'll also predict more recent communities, like English from Yorkshire. That'll show up on the map. You can also compare this chromosome painting, is what this is called, with others who match you if they've chosen to share that information. And that can sometimes help you pinpoint which ancestry or which ancestors you might share. They also will let you change the confidence level on your ethnicity estimate. So the default view is 50% confidence level, which is somewhat speculative, but if you change that confidence level to 70 or 90, it may become more general, like you may end up with more ethnicity that's estimated to be broadly Northwestern European, but general often is actually a little more accurate in cases like that. It really is truly hard to distinguish easily between someone from Scotland and someone from England, though they have tried and I think made some progress on that. So this is what you might see when you look at a match at 23andMe. Again, it's totally up to how much information they want to include about their age, where they live, what they're interested in, where their ancestors are from. The family tree spot there, you can't actually put a family tree on 23andMe, but you can put a link to a family tree that you build on Ancestry or wherever else you might have a family tree. If you have your own website, like my husband does, or something like that. The relatives in common feature, I really appreciate using at 23andMe because, again, this gives you the data of how much, say, your uncle is sharing with a particular relative. And so you and this uncle, your uncle and nephew or uncle and niece, but this relative and your uncle may only be fourth cousins, which might tell you, if this relative is fairly close to you, they might relate to your uncle in a different way than they relate to you. Like maybe they are your first cousin on your mom's side, but on your uncle's side, which might be your dad's side, they might be a fourth cousin on that side. That can happen. And so this is a really good way to look at your matches at 23andMe to be sure that you're not making incorrect assumptions about what side this person might be related on or how closely related they are to you. The shared DNA column, this just means, does this match share DNA in the same area of the same chromosomes as you and the other person you're comparing them to? Because if you get 3 matches, which it's called triangulation, I'll talk about that a little bit more, but if you get 3 matches that are all sharing on the same spot on the same chromosome, that's a much better indicator that that DNA might have come with from a very specific ancestor that you all share. So 23andMe, while they don't actually let you put in a traditional tree, they have a family tree feature where they will try to predict where you and your ancestors, how you're related. And so they will do this based on the DNA that you share with other matches at 23andMe. And if you or these other matches have submitted information as to how you're related to each other, so they'll try to build that. And so you won't always see names here because that depends upon whether you or the other users have submitted names, but they will try to build this graphic of, well, these matches are all on side A and these matches are all on side B. They can kind of tell that based on all the comparisons that their system is able to do. It isn't always 100% accurate, but it can be a helpful clue, just sort of general sorting of your matches where you can visualize, oh, these 2 over here, they're closely related to each other, whereas this one over here is on the completely opposite side of my family tree. So 23andMe has a health package. You can either buy it when you buy your autosomal DNA test, or you can buy it separately or later. And they have several kinds of health reports. Carrier status means you carry a gene that you can pass down for something. Health predisposition reports are about if you have a risk of developing something eventually in your life. Wellness reports, they can give you nutrition suggestions, tell you what muscle type you have, interesting things like that that might be relevant currently to you. And then traits, those are things like eye color. Can you taste cilantro? It's stuff that's just kind of interesting, not necessarily going to affect your health one way or the other, but it's stuff people are interested in. So at Family Tree DNA, you can sort your matches there a few different ways. They don't necessarily have as many sorting and searching features, but they do have some good ones. There's a in common with or not in common with, which is show me all the matches me and this person share, or show me all the matches me and this person don't share. And sometimes you may want that second kind of search if you're looking for something specific and you've got a ton of matches from your dad's side, but you're looking for something specific from your mom's side. That not in common with one can be really helpful. You can search by surname if they've included family surname information. People can upload trees to Family Tree DNA. It's a pretty basic sort of view of the tree that you'll get, but you can put a tree in there. Family Tree DNA will also tell you if you're an X match to the person, which I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that can be useful for certain kinds of research. So they have a chromosome browser similar to the view I showed you at 23andMe. They will let you see segments you might share with one or more matches, which can indicate common ancestry. And then another thing you need to know about family tree DNA, so they don't have health features. They do work with law enforcement, and so if you've seen any of the news stories or read any about crimes that have been solved using DNA, that is one of the databases that law enforcement can get permission to access. They don't just have open access to it, but if they have a particular case that they'd like to use it for, they have a process they have to go through to get into Family Tree DNA's database, and it's just like any other kit that gets put into the database. Matches will appear and they can see whatever's posted on those matches, though in some instances, if it's a really crucial case, they can request contact information as well. But that's Family Tree DNA. They do that, and Gedmatch is another site I'll talk about later that does that as well. But the Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, those companies do not have, they don't work with law enforcement on cases. So if you're wanting to contribute to that, if you want your DNA in a database where you could potentially be a clue to helping solve crimes, then you would need to upload into Family Tree DNA or Gedmatch. So Living DNA is the last one I'm just going to talk a little bit about. They're a British company. They're smaller, but they are working on having some good features with ethnicity percentages. They've worked a lot on being able to be really specific on that with ancient and recent ancestry, particularly from the UK. And then they also have a match list feature. And so I will check Living DNA on cases I'm working on, particularly if a person has British ancestry. Because they don't have as many matches yet in the database as Ancestry or 23andMe or some of the others, you're less likely to find a match there, but the more people that upload into there or tested there, the more useful that will become. So Gedmatch, it was called Gedmatch Genesis for a while. I probably need to change that on this slide. They have a lot of different tools you can use. This site was originally built by two hobbyists who were named Curtis Rogers and John Olson. They built it in 2010 to start being able to do more advanced analysis and be able to compare DNA from different testing companies. They have a bunch of different tools. They have ones to do with ethnicity, with analyzing matches or groups of matches. They have an eye color predictor. They have a tool called Are Your Parents Related? That's AYPR there, which is helpful if you're starting to do research using your DNA to find out, oh, were my parents related distantly or closely? Because that affects your matches and how much DNA you're going to share with them. This is one where law enforcement can have access to results, but you do need to opt in. So if you see this screenshot, this example of some of the tools and features they have, there's a pencil next to a kit, and that's where you go to either give permission or remove permission for law enforcement access. One of the tools they have, which is really interesting, is called a Lazarus tool, which lets you try to recreate an ancestor's DNA using the results from multiple descendants of that ancestor. So you can get a look at what would that ancestor have had. So this last little bit of my presentation, I'm just going to go over some random other strategies, tools I use sometimes on research cases. Multi-kit analysis and coverage analysis, they're both kind of relevant to this example, which I just found this week. It's actually one of my husband's ancestors that people forever have been trying to figure out who Daniel Arnold's parents were. My husband had a theory as to who his father was and put it out there years ago, but people took it as the gospel truth, and he said, well, hold on, we haven't proven this, but there's someone else out there working on this puzzle right now. And what they're trying to do to figure out who Daniel Arnold's parents were is getting results from a lot of descendants. So multi-kit analysis is where You get access to the results of multiple descendants from unique descent lines, and then you look at who is else out there is sharing DNA with multiple members of this family group, because there might be clues about the further back ancestry in their family lines. Coverage analysis is something that you can kind of use in a research problem like this as well, where you try to figure out how much of this particular ancestor's genome is actually represented by descendants that have tested. And sometimes you can use that amount to kind of prove or disprove a theory as to how an ancestor fit in a particular family. But that's something you can read more about. I have some links at the end as well about how you might use this, but needless to say, I'm excited. My husband's excited as well that someone else out there is doing this with his family, and we may have his mom submit her DNA to this project and see if that can be helpful to this research. So what else can you do with chromosome data? I've talked a lot about some of these tools that will show you what's on your chromosomes and what you share with people. So triangulation, that's a term I've talked about already. It means identifying the segments of DNA that a test subject and at least 2 other matches all share in common. If all three match each other on the same segment of DNA, that could indicate a recent shared ancestor. Being able to identify fully identical regions or runs of homozygosity, those are 2 similar but not the same terms. Fully identical regions, the best example of that is 2 siblings. They'll have fully identical regions, which means on chromosome 12, they will share DNA on the top and the bottom of that chromosome pair, because they got some of their chromosome 12 from their mutual mother, they got some of their chromosome 12 from their mutual father. So fully identical regions happen when a match is related to you through both of your parents. It could be siblings, it could be double cousins, things like that. And that's important for research. Runs of homozygosity means you have the same values in both halves of the chromosome pair, and that's because both of your parents had those same values. And that is often an indication that your parents are related. They might have been cousins or related in some other way. But yeah, both of those have slightly different research implications. Fully identical regions means you're related to them on both sides of the family. Runs of homozygosity means your parents were probably related to each other. So immediately adjacent segments, this picture kind of illustrates it better than I can. This is comparing 2 matches to one another. They are matches that are shared with each other and shared with you. They don't share in the same spot, but they share segments that are right by each other, and that can be a good indication that that match is related, like you share ancestors with that match. Overlapping opposites is kind of the opposite situation, where these 2 matches, they both show sharing with the main tester on the same part of chromosome 13, but they are not matches to one another. And what that would be an indication of then is one could be from your maternal side and one could be from your paternal side, because this particular graphic is from MyHeritage, and it doesn't, when it looks at you in a match and which chromosome you share on, it doesn't necessarily tell you, oh, you're sharing on the top or you're sharing on the bottom, which you get from 2 different parents. So xDNA, like I said earlier, family tree DNA shows you how much xDNA you share with a person, or if you share at all, and that can be helpful because there are certain lines you don't get any xDNA from, and there's certain lines you might get a lot of xDNA from, just because, for example, I did not get any xDNA from my dad's father, from my paternal grandfather, because my dad got a Y chromosome from his father, got an X chromosome from his mother. So on that side of my tree, I'm only going to have xDNA from my dad's mother. And so this can be at least helpful to eliminating certain relationships or making certain relationships more likely when you're doing research. And one very specific application of xDNA is if two women share the same father but have different mothers, they're going to have an identical X chromosome because they would have both gotten that X chromosome from their father. That was the only X chromosome he had to give. These are a couple of other tools I use on a regular basis. DNA Painter, it's just a calculator basically where you can enter in the amount of DNA you share with a match, and it'll give you possibilities and probabilities of how you might relate to that match. What are the odds? Both of them are on the DNA Painter website, but what are the odds allows you to build a family tree of matches and how much they share with one another, with a particular tester, and how they're related to one another. And that can help you get ideas of how that tester might fit into that family if they don't know, because there could be multiple possibilities. There could be multiple siblings or cousins or whoever that could be that person's parent or grandparent within a family. Clustering tools, there's a bunch of them out there, and I'm not going to go through all of them because there's a lot, but they're a way to visualize your matches and put them into groups. It's sort of like you have a bunch of 100-piece puzzles that you've spilled all over a table. This is like your cheat of having the number 2 or the number 3 or whatever on the back of puzzles that belong in a particular box, and being able to at least put them in the right pile before you put them together. So these tools, they are not, for the most part, on the websites of these testing companies. With the exception of MyHeritage DNA, they do have a clustering tool that you can use. You can only set certain parameters with it, but that it can be really useful to get the auto cluster, which is what it's called from MyHeritage. So this is another one that's called the Collins-Leeds method. It helps you sort your matches under 400 centimorgans into groups, and then helps you figure out which grandparent they're related to through. You can finesse it and break it down even further. Dana Leeds is the creator of this tool, and so I'd suggest going to her website to learn more how to use this tool. Genetic Affairs is one where you have to get your raw data from another place like Ancestry or 23andMe and upload it into there. There's a process of time that has to pass as it looks through your results, and then it'll sort them into these pretty little colored coded groups. And ideally, each cluster may represent a great grandparent's family, a specific line in your ancestry. It can look different though if there's endogamy, which endogamy is when over a long period of time, because of geography or religion or ethnicity or whatever it is, people only have children within a limited group. And so in an endogamous population, you're going to be related distantly to a lot of people in that population, and your cluster is not going to look as neat as this. It's going to look more like this. This auto cluster is from my grandfather, whose father's side was a bunch of small families with recent immigration in New York City. His mother's side was from Newfoundland, Canada, from an area of Newfoundland where there was a lot of intermarriage, a lot of endogamy, generations of people staying in that area, not leaving. So that giant orange cluster is his Newfoundland cluster, where everybody's just kind of all related. And some of these smaller clusters are from his Newfoundland side as well, some families that were maybe a little more recent or distinct, but he doesn't have very much representation of his other lines compared to his Newfoundland side. So DNA Gedcom is another one of these clustering tools, can gather DNA from the main sites. There's several ways you can visualize your data. So you can visualize it in a graph, a cluster, like some of the other ones we've seen. You can also export the information and view it as a spreadsheet. Some people prefer to look at the details in the spreadsheet. You can save the details of how many centimorgans you share with different masters, and you can order them in different ways. And you can also see whether a match has a tree or not. They'll have a link where you can quickly click to that match's tree. You can look at who they're in common with. This particular screenshot I have, I actually was sorting a tester's matches by which ethnicity regions they had, because this was a tester who had New Zealand ancestry, and so she had a lot of Polynesian as well as British Isles ancestry, but she was very specifically interested in one of her lines that only came from the British Isles. So I wanted to use this spreadsheet to be able to find matches that did not have Polynesian and use them as clues for the British Isles ancestor that she was curious about. So this is my last slide with all the different links, a bunch of random things, the New York Times article about privacy policies and protecting your privacy with DNA testing. The Legal Genealogist is another blogger who talks a lot about those and other legal or ethical issues in genealogy. There's an interesting article about someone who took some different tests, 23andMe, as well as some of these other health ones out there, and what she learned from that. I've had somebody in the past ask about 23andMe and trisomy conditions. So conditions like Down syndrome, where someone might have an extra copy of a chromosome, and what 23andMe does with that. The bottom line is that kind of test is not meant for detecting that. And if I remember correctly what I read, they just look at 2 of the 3 chromosomes, even if you have 3. So it's not necessarily what that test is designed for, but they have more details about that. If you want to learn more about DNA coverage or chromosome browsers, clustering, endogamy, lots of good articles there with lots of details that you can read about some of those. And if there are any questions in the Q&A. So the first question from Krista, I've done my DNA and connected to a 6th to 8th cousin out of Australia. Took her genealogy line up to 1744 in hopes of finding our common ancestor. Her line stops at the same time as mine, so we're stuck. Grateful for DNA, but don't know how to proceed with my line. Any thoughts? So with 6th to 8th cousins in 1744, you may be getting kind of to the edge of what autosomal DNA can do for you. If this is a male ancestor that her line stops at and yours does as well, Y-DNA testing plans can sometimes help with this if you can find direct male line descendants of the ancestors you're interested in and do some Y testing. That can be helpful. There may be some more advanced comparisons you can do with looking at the really small centimorgan value DNA matches you and the 6th to 8th cousin share, and trying to learn about those matches trees. So, getting more people in on the project that also might share that ancestry, particularly if you can see that they share on the same segment. But yeah, it's kind of a tricky place to end up back in 1744. And I'm sure if you talk to someone who was I'm guessing this is a British research specialist, they might have some more thoughts for you as far as traditional research and how you might be able to tie those 2 lines together. Oh, and then can you tell which parent 1 and parent 2 is? So that's back on our ancestry view. They have the parent 1, parent 2. They won't be able to tell you that because they're just looking at your DNA. They don't know which one's your mom and which one's your dad. If you already know, like in my grandma's case, it was pretty easy to see I can't remember what it looked like, but we'll just say parent 1 is your Portuguese parent. Obviously, that's your mother. But if you don't know already, then, I had a case like that where I was looking at a person's DNA who she was adopted. It was obvious she had one parent who was from North Africa and one parent who was from Europe, but I couldn't tell by looking at the chromosomes which one was her mother and which one was her father. That requires some research.